An important part of monitoring a network or a host is to look at log files. By looking at log files, we can not only verify that things are running as they normally should be, but we might even be able to detect indicators of compromises or anything suspicious. If we know that an attack took place, we can refer to log files to start doing reverse engineering. We can go through the kill chain, as it's called, and work backwards to see how someone infiltrated a network. So log files are going to be important at many levels in the network, on your edge point devices, on database servers, on web servers, on storage array devices, VPNs, servers, everything should have log files. So what's important here is we need to be able to also ensure that those log files are secured. What do I mean? If a device gets compromised, let's say a file server on our network gets compromised. If it's compromised, so are its log files. So how do we secure log files? So one of the most common ways to deal with that is to forward log entries to a centralized logging host elsewhere on a protected network. Now we've got a number of tools in Windows that we can use to work with logs. We can use the Event Viewer GUI interface, or we can use PowerShell commandlets. For example, in PowerShell, you could issue the get-event log PowerShell commandlet to begin retrieving different types of Windows logs, and you can add different command line parameters if you want to filter it out, maybe only for critical event log entries. Linux log files can also be viewed in a variety of different ways. Most Linux distributions store the log files somewhere under /var/log. And the actual names of the log files themselves may vary from one distribution to another. For example, in Ubuntu Linux, the standard system log file is under /var/log, and the file itself is actually called syslog. In Linux, as we know, we can use the logger command to write log entries to Linux logs, such as a part of a script that might back up files on a Linux host. Other Linux commands that let you view log files include commands like journalctl, journal control. Now, we can also view logs on devices out on the network. As you might imagine, a router, a switch, a network printer, a Wi-Fi router, all of these items also log activity. Now, you can configure them to determine the detail of activity that gets logged, but ideally what we'll be doing is configuring log forwarding so that we have not only the copy of the logs on the devices, which potentially might be compromised, you never know, but it's also nice to have that sent elsewhere. Now, what we don't want is our centralized logging host to be compromised. That's obviously a big problem. So let's take a few minutes then and poke around both in Windows and in Linux looking at log entries. We're going to start in Windows. So here on my Windows server, I'm going to open up the Start menu, and this is Windows Server 2019. So the event viewer is right in the Start menu without me clicking on or typing in anything. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Event Viewer tool. Now, if you've managed Windows hosts in the past and done this type of thing, it's going to look and feel the same. Not a lot has changed here in Server 2019. Over on the left, I can expand Windows logs, and I've got the standard categories, the application log, security log, which is where you're going to see things like logon failures. You're going to have a system log, which is for pretty much anything that happens in the Windows OS. And if you've configured log forwarding on Windows hosts, so if maybe items are being forwarded from other hosts to this machine is the central host, then we could go to forwarded events to see those entries in one place. Let's go back to system. Here we have a number of log entries. These ones that I'm seeing happen to be informational. They're date and time stamped. I have a source of the log entry and the event ID. Now the event ID in Windows is important. Let's actually do that in the security log. Now the reason the event ID is important because it indicates the type of log entry that was written to the event viewer. For example, here in my security log, right, I've got an audit failure. And some kind of a logon failure. I think people are still trying to attack my virtual machine in the cloud that has a public IP. Yeah, that's what's happening, but that's fine. Anyway, what's really important here is notice the event ID is 4625, but wait a minute, that's the same for a lot of these logon failures. Well, that's because when that type of entry is logged, it's always a 4625. Why is that important? Filtering. So for example, all I want to see are audit failures. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to right-click on the security log on the left, and I'm going to choose Filter Current Log. Now, you can choose to filter on a number of items, like the event level. I only want to see warnings or critical entries. I can also choose from certain event sources, what generated that log entry, and the event ID and other things below, like keywords or usernames or computer names. I'm interested in the event ID. Now, in our case, we had a 4625 audit failure message. Well, you know what? That's a problem. I'm really alarmed by that, and I would like to focus only on that. I don't want to see the other noise. So 4625, okay. So we can see now that we filtered out all the log entries in the security log, and as I scroll down, they are only 4625 entries. And of course, they're all date and time stamped, which is going to be important if you're actually trying to track down what happened with a specific security incident. So we've got a number of logs available. I could click on the left under Applications and Service Logs, go under Microsoft, under Windows, and then I get logs for a lot of subsystems or subcomponents in the Windows OS. So for example, if I go all the way down, let's say to the G's, there's group policy. So I can get some operational messages related to group policy on this machine. So we can do this here in the Event Viewer GUI, and as we mentioned, there's also PowerShell commandlets that allow you to work with this. Now, what about viewing log information in a Linux environment? One of the first things that we're going to do here is ls/var/log, because we said that most log files are written to this location. And here we have a number of subdirectories and log files. Now, as you install more services on a Linux host, as you might imagine, those services might have their own log files. So you can expect to see more or perhaps less entries on a Linux host that you control, depending on what's installed on it. Now, for example, here we have kern log, K-E-R-N. That's the operating system kernel log. So what I might do, if I wanted to see, let's say, the first couple of lines in that file, first 10 to be exact, I could use the head command. We learned about that. head/var/log/kern.log. There's the first 10 lines. Or if we wanted the last 10 lines, let's say, though, of a different log file, how about the syslog file? tail/var/log/syslog, last 10 lines. Or of course, if you want to view an entire log, as you know, what you could do instead of using tail for the last 10 lines is cat. And it gives me the entire system log. But don't forget to combine things that we already learned, like grepping, the line filtering tool. If I pipe that to grep, and let's say I search for Dan, because I think I had a custom log message from another example. Here's Dan's first log entry from way back when. So you can filter the log using that type of tool. Now, this is just what's built into the OS. Certainly at the enterprise level, you can gather logs in a central place and use tools, third-party tools that you could buy or that might be open source that will generate nice graphs based on this information. But this type of thing we can do directly within the operating system. So don't forget then to know how to get around in the operating system you're using to get to log entries.